Painstaking research in Greek and Turkish archives, both public and private, was supplemented by in situ research and photographic documentation of the subject matter by the author. Over the last decades, while the intermediate results and initial conclusions of the project have been presented in a number of international conferences, especially for Smyrna and its comparative Thessaloniki, one should mention the very successful exhibition that took place here in Izmir 3 years ago under the title Thessalonica Smyrna of my sister at Kadar Izmir. The chapter on Smyrna could be developed through new in situ researchers and updated, taking under consideration all the recent bibliographical sources, and I hope to be able to present it up to here when it will be published. Let's see here. That was the introduction of the book. From as early as the period of the Enlightenment, and especially following the signing of the Treaty of Kutsuka-Energy in 1774, with its very favorable terms for shipping and trade, Smyrna had begun to evolve rapidly into a dynamic metropolis. In 1717, it has a population of 30,000 people, 10,000 of whom were Greeks. 100 years later, the population had grown to 150, with a Greek community now numbering 6,000. This big increase in the size of the Greek population was mainly due to large-scale migration from the Peloponnese, Crete and the islands of the Aegean and the Ionian Seas. So maybe I have some grandfather who came from the Ionian Sea here. I don't know. As the 18th century drew to a close, a new middle class emerged, engaged in commercial activities. Many Greeks were now in possession of substantial capital and under the protection of Russia and England, engaged in banking, in trading, ventures, competing with major European businesses. By the end of the 19th century, Smyrna had acquired a distinct identity in the mind of the Ottomans and was known as Infidel Smyrna, a city where the Muslim population was outnumbered by the other ethnic communities, Christians and Jews. As for the spatial distribution around the city of the various communities, the Greeks lived for the most part close to the port and the commercial center, in the French Quarter, Franco-Mahalas, Franco-Mahalasi, which had been home to the European population, English, French, Dutch, Venetians and Genoans, since the 16th century. The Jewish community lived in the highest areas of the city and the Muslims in the upper city. European residents had their homes in their city center and also at Buza and Bornova. Apart from the Greek population within the city itself, there were also Greek communities settled in the surrounding areas close to the city, along the coast, at the key points along the road and rail network, providing easy access to Smyrna. The city underwent an important phase in its evolution during the 19th century and in the years leading up to 1922. The main characteristic of this phase was the large-scale expansion of the urban space and the predominance of the non-Muslim, mainly Greek population. The wide-ranging reforms introduced by the Ottoman Empire between 1839 and 1856, Haile Sharif and Haile Humayun, and the economical and cultural penetration by Europeans led as a direct consequence to the rise of the minorities, the non-Muslim populations, and in the case of Smyrna, in particular, the Greeks and the Armenians. The old spatial and functional divisions and distinctions, neighborhoods, populated exclusively by particular ethnic religious communities, market areas, became less rigorous while new districts emerged with different identities. Central functions, areas devoted to leisure activities and high-income housing, working class districts, elegant centers, for permanent housing, rather than summer homes as it was before, and run down neglected neighborhoods. The rapid development and simultaneous expansion of the city were stimulated by the major infrastructure projects undertaken by foreign companies during the period from mid-1850s to 1870. A project of a greater significance for the form and structure of the city was the construction of the port and waterfront from 1869 to 1875, originally an English initiative but finally undertaken by the French company Dussault. The engineer was Polycarpos Vitalis, who was also involved in the construction of the Thessaloniki waterfront in the early 1870s. The Punta area, the same project, and the similar project for Thessaloniki. A strip of land 150 meters wide and 3 kilometers long was created along the old coasting using landfill. In all, 40 hectares were added to the surface area of the city. The waterfront boulevard was the first modern road to be created in Smyrna. The road itself occupied 12 meters of the overall 20 meters width of the water strip, where also there was a tram line. And the building plots adjacent to it were the most expensive in the whole city, of course. All the most lucrative functions, new type of leisure facilities, theaters, hotels, clubs, found themselves competing for a waterfront site. A new division of the area now took shape, reflecting the distinctions of an economic and social character. Along the length of the new waterfront, the type of the Smyrna urban house was created, and groups of affluent Greeks, Armenians, and Europeans made their homes. In the spatial development of Smyrna, as it made the transition from the 19th to the 20th century, one can discern the existence of two parallel cities. To the south, the old city, with the old neighborhoods on the hill and the traditional market on the side of the medieval area. To the north, the European city, which grew up as the European merchants arrived, and absorbed for whole game out of economic, social, and technological change. The city was to be lost in the destruction of Smyrna in 1922. The dualism was already apparent as early as 1889 to the Turkish administrators, such as Mithat Pasha, who sought ways mainly through urban planning to encourage the urbanization of other parts of the city too. Some fascinating texts were produced proposing the widening of boulevards and remodeling of 4 districts in the old city to regenerate the area and allow it to develop along the same lines as the waterfront and northern districts. This is the plan road of 1907 for security, not the security, insurance, Sigurta companies. The most ambitious plan for the regeneration and embellishment of Smyrna, but never realized, was undertaken by the French Compagnie Générale des Entreprises at the recommendation of the architect, civil engineer Polycarpos Vitalis, a Greek from the island of Tinos, and involved the widening of 3 boulevards. The first of these commenced at the Stock Exchange and ran as far as Mahane, with a branch turning off at the Chakmak Bakery, to pass in front of the administration building and end at the prison, thereby forming the second main boulevard. The third began at Bella Vista and also ended at Basmahane, passing through the neighborhoods of St. Ekaterini and St. Dimitrios. The boulevards were to be 20 to 30 meters in height, and even broader at certain key points. They would have an asphalt surface and the pavements 4 to 5 meters in width would be paved in marble. The boulevards, buildings and piazzas would have electric lighting to be installed by the company itself. As for the buildings, which would line the boulevards, they were to be the height of elegance. The magazine Cosmos concludes its remarks on the ambitious scheme by urging the people of Smyrna to close their eyes and conjure up the vision of the Smyrna of the future. I quote, "Imagine this city of boulevards with its fine marble buildings, the asphalt roads and pavements bathed in electric light, the pedestrians marveling and the displays in the windows of the luxury stores lining the streets, while along the road motor vehicles whiz past one another with a speed and energy which are the hallmarks of progress and modern civilization. Imagine the city squares full of people that open your eyes. There is a chance of you seeing this vision again, a chance that this vision we have conjured up of the city and its boulevards in a few years' time will not remain merely a plan but will turn into a glorious reality." End of quote. Perspective drawing presented by the magazine with a subtitle, "View of Boulevard Number 1 as it passes through the Chakmak Bakery district," in fact represents a design by the Spanish architect José López Salas-Puri for the widening of the Gran Via in Madrid and its intersection with Alcalá Street. The project has been funded by the same construction company which hoped to bring the splendors of Baron Haussmann from Madrid to Smyrna. It was funny because it's a very well-known picture of Madrid, and then suddenly I saw it in a newspaper, in a magazine, describing this street of Osmania. So it was just advertising of the same company. The architecture of the city. The literature contains a number of references to the architect of Smyrna, the overwhelming majority of whom were Greeks. The almanac gave to Smyrna for the year 1888, published by the Amalthea newspaper, mentions the following architects: Aslan Effendi, Vitalis Rokos, Vitalis Polycarpos, Deris, Kokinos, Latris, Manganiotis, Markosov, Pezaros, Petrokokinos, Rambaounis, and Stephanitis. 30 years later, the Greek Geo Guide for 1920 lists a new generation of architects: Apostolidis, Pafiadis, Ismidlis, Koumoulis, Kokinos, Kalokerinos, Pignadis, Lidis, Petrokokkinos, Simitopoulos, Nechat, and the famous Perret, the one who made the circular in the Konak Square. As for the public buildings of Smyrna, those constructed at the initiative of the state or municipal authorities, there is no reliable information in either the Greek or Turkish literature, so in the absence of any other evidence, we might well attribute the Konak to Rokos Vitalis, as it was mentioned in this guidebook, from Tinos, and many of the government buildings to Dimitris Lignatis. The Konak, which still dominates the main square, I don't think anymore, it is demolished. In Smyrna was constructed in the last decades of the 19th century in a neoclassical style which evokes the early attempts to transfer Western models to the first public buildings of the Ottoman capital, Istanbul. As for the neighborhood barracks with their markedly eclectic style, recent research has attributed them to the master builder Eustratios Kalonaris, widely known as Smyrneos or Isverli, who designed the Evangelistria Church of Tinos, his native island. In each turn, the Greek community, the largest in the city in terms of population, took advantage of the approved legal status offered by the Ottoman reforms to renew the architecture of its community churches and to introduce special types of buildings to house its schools. Two of the architects, Latris and Vafiadis. Of the 21 churches functioning in 1922, most had been built or subjected to radical modification in the second half of the 19th century. The Metropolitan Church of St. Fotini, Agia Fotini, one of the oldest churches in Smyrna, acquired its trademark campanile as early as 1856. The exquisite piece of work was designed by the architect Xenophon Latris. On the left. The Church of St. Georgios, on the right, was completely redesigned in 1856 to plans drawn up by the master builder Stratios Kalonaris. The new features added to this otherwise typical post-Byzantine Basilica church included the dome and the twin campaniles. After the Tanzimat, they were allowed to build higher campaniles and clock towers. Xenophon Latris. Here is the plan of gold insurance map with two churches, Agia Fotini and Agios St. George. The detail of the Church of St. Agios Georgios. Xenophon Latris also designed the Church of the Greek Cemetery, 1878, and the Church of Santa Caterina, Agia Caterina. This, the largest church in Smyrna, was reconstructed in 1898 in the by now universally accepted Greek Byzantine style, which was first employed on the orders of King Otto and the Metropolitan Church of Athens. It consisted in the application of neoclassical facade to a Byzantine crossing square domed church. The records show that in 1920 there were 20 primary schools serving the Greek community of the city with 7,000 students and a further 10 private schools with 1,500 students. In the suburbs there were 18 schools serving a total of 300 students. The most important of these places of education were the Evangeliki Boys' School and the two girls' schools, the Central School and the Omirion, both recognized as equivalent of the famous Arsakio School for girls in Athens. They were also all housed at this period in contemporary buildings whose Greek style of architecture demonstrated the close affinity between their teaching and the principles of the Association for the Dissemination of Greek Language and Literature and the corresponding architecture of the Athenian schools. As the education has been Hellenized after the Tanzimat, so the architecture of the school buildings has been Hellenized through neoclassicism. The Omirion, a fine marble building, as elegant as a little palace, was a comment in a newspaper of that period, was built in 1886-87 to plans by Xenophon Latris, a graduate of the Ingolstadt Architectural School in Bavaria and an experienced connoisseur of the neoclassical vocabulary. The Central Girls' School was housed in a new building between 1909 and 12. The plans were commissioned by the Greek community from the well-known Athenian architect Karathanasopoulos, famous for his devotion to an eclecticism which owed much to the aesthetics of the Second French Empire and the Belle Epoque. Karathanasopoulos, in in this case, had no hesitation about designing an imposing building in the classical Greek style with propylae and a pediment of marble. So, it was something different from what he did before. His style was well known in summer palaces, in private residences, in a high eclectic style. But here he was persuaded to build on purpose a neoclassical building. The interesting thing is that it's one of the first buildings, I suppose, in Smyrna, that it was constructed with beton armé, concrete. And here are some plans I've discovered some years ago in the Hanebik Enterprise Archive in Paris. The first sketch by Karathanosopoulos in order to calculate the concrete structure, and then the final facade by this Hanebik company given to the Greek community to construct the house in concrete. Contemporaries received special praise for the ceremonial hall of the first floor, a store of columns in the Ionic order, on which the classrooms of the second floor were supported. The famous Evangeliki Skoli has been housed in a new building since 1882. By 1894, it has opened a separate commercial school and also boasts the city's only library with 33,000 books and 1,200 manuscripts. Constantly increasing needs for space led the Smyrna elders to decide on the construction of a new school in the Santa Caterini neighborhood. In this case too, the Ionic order was chosen for the building. The foundations were laid in 1909 and were completed in 1922. The school only started to function after the last Greek student had left the city. The Evangeliki school also had many branches in Smyrna and the surrounding region. Plans of the school, how it was 30 years ago when I took them the picture, and the plans I have discovered in the Prime Minister Ottoman archives in Istanbul. Unfortunately, not a very good quality of preservation. We don't know the architect, so if you find one day the architect, let me know. It's the only building of that size and that importance, we don't know the architect. So the Evangeliki Skoli had also many branches in Smyrna and in the surrounding region. Of this, the St. Ioannis Theologos School in Epano Machala, Upper Town, 1904, and the Sophion Primary School on Rodon Street in Bornova were housed in new buildings in a neoclassical style. Interesting school buildings from an architectural point of view, in a pure neoclassical style again, have been designed by the architects mentioned above in all the neighborhoods and suburbs of Smyrna, as well as in villages in the surrounding area. Some plans I have discovered recently, and we will have more in the forthcoming book, show these plans for small schools in the surrounding area. The same model, and in a bigger scale, the school in Moula, which has been destroyed. A huge one, bigger than the previous ones, like the famous Central Girls' School or the Evangeliki School of the city itself. The Greek, let's say, University of Smyrna, housed in a building originally intended for a Turkish school and completed to plans drawn by the Greek architect Aristotelis Zachos in 1922. The building reflects the sensibilities of the founder of the Return to Our Roots movement. He was a regionalistic architect, requiring the incorporation into contemporary architecture of features from the broader local tradition. This building, the Κεντρικό School and the Evangelical Schoolie have all retained their original educational use and mark the continuity of the city's iconography before and after 1920. However, provisions of community facilities extended beyond the fields of the church and the school. From as early as 1748, the Greek community had been maintaining the oldest and most important of the city's hospital, the St. Charalambos. Again, this building that was renovated in order to house the university, and a plan of Xanthos to transform the old structure to a modern building with features from the ancient and Byzantine periods of the country. So this is the hospital of St. Charalambos. And then there was an orphanage, an asylum for abandoned Greek children, which was opened next to it. Here is the picture of the orphanage. Writing in 1880, Charles de Chaucer describes the hospital as a huge foundation housed in a fine building containing a nursing and surgical section, a maternity unit, a department for general medicine, and special provision for the elderly, the infants, and the incurable. Commercial buildings. Commercial gazetteers from the first decade of the 20th century and the plans produced by Gord in 1905 indicate the important Greek contribution to all areas of public activity, trade, banking, import-export businesses, both in the European and the traditional city, where also the non-Muslim presence was predominant. However, although the old traditional market remained active, it is beyond doubt that the city's center of gravity now had shifted to the new districts, Ulta and mostly the waterfront. At the beginning of the 20th century, out of 11 banks in the city, 3 were Greek-owned: the Bank of Mytilene, the Bank of Athens, and the Orient Bank. The Orient Bank was designed by Ignatios Zofiadis, 1909, also responsible for the Stock Exchange building. Another view of the seafront with the Bank of Orient. And Zofiadis was responsible for the design of the Stock Exchange building before 1905, still existing, without this power, where the National Bank of Greece has its office during the period of Greek administration of the city. Zofiadis was a graduate of the Athens Polytechnic School, 1892, and student of Ernst Schiller. He adopted the latter's tendency to branch out from true classicism into other forms of expression, Renaissance, Baroque, emulating the versatile and pliable morphological expression of his teacher. We see the same morphological tendencies at work in the Bank of Athens by Rambaulis, 1905, which dominates the Agia Fotini passage and contains clear references to the French architecture of the Second Empire. In the private sector, we have less neoclassical buildings because the symbolic values are not so important. In the same district, apart from the typical Verhanedes, Verhaneler, if I pronounce correct, Verhaneler, of the French Quarter, which were adapted to serve new users, in Smyrna even the large stores like Louvre and the Eastern and the Rosdivac were housed in these buildings. There were other passages wrongly referred to as Verhanedes. These were later structures, mainly passages, connected to busy and fashionable shops. The busiest of the passages were Tanekidis and Bon Marseille. The complete destruction of these districts in the fire of August 1922 and the absence of any illustrative material makes it impossible for us to identify the architecture of the lost building stock. Meanwhile, new building types were introduced for the luxury hotels, clubs, theatres, and leisure venues, which now crowded along the waterfront. Most of this area was burnt down in 1922, but fortunately photographic evidence has survived. The waterfront was opened to the public in June 1874. It was 3,327 meters in length and 18 meters wide, and paved with regular square slabs of Napolitan stone. There were two distinct sections. The commercial section beginning at the Konak and extending to the Kumerkaki small custom house, 1,200 in length, and the fashionable section beginning at the Kumerkaki and terminating to the Punta railway station, 2 kilometers in length. This is the fashionable section, and this is the commercial section. I quote, "It is both the Europe of the Orient and the Orient of Europe. On one side, up as far as Punta and beyond, is the fashionable promenade, lined with magnificent residences, splendid cafes, fashion stores, consulates, theatres, clubs, displays, fancy dress, etc. The waterfront of leisure, of opulent self-indulgence, and the other direction, the commercial waterfront, with custom house, offices, works, the stock exchange, the inns, the cargoes and porters, and the sailors and carts, the steamers, the shipping agents and brokers, a scene of ceaseless bustle, the struggle for life, everyone sweating from his exertions, jostling and elbowing his way through the crowd, growing ever more tired and weary. On one side, the world of idleness and leisure, on the other side, the world of hard work, one work producing, the other consuming." End of quote. In 1889, probably in view of the impending transfer of the operation of the waterfront to the French company, Société de Quai d'Ismir, a cadastral map was prepared, we just saw in the beginning, over the signature of the engineer employed by the Guissot Frère company, Polycarpos Vitalis. The map is held in the private Ministerial archives in Istanbul and was published in 1999 by Professor Çınar Atay. An enthusiastic scholar of the modern history of Smyrna, Professor Atay, also published in 1997 a series of rare photographs of the city from the same period, the Rubenen Archive, 1880-1890. After careful study of the two archives, Groves plans, as well as more recent photographs of the waterfront, we can identify with a certain degree of confidence a fair number of the buildings shown. In the fashionable stretch of the waterfront, there were buildings housing shops on the ground floor, with private dwellings or offices above, as well as hotels and leisure venues. As for the Greek-owned properties, Street Block 15 was the site of the Luka Saduka Theatre and Cafe, housed in the basement of the Hotel de la Ville, which was opened 1st July 1877, one of the first. As well as the Fotiadis building, which housed the famous Kramer Hotel and later the Greek Club, and also the building of Stavachopoulos Theodoridis, part of which contained the premises of the Greek Hermes Association. These two buildings. Kramer Palace in detail. During the first years of the 20th century, places of entertainment Assembly and spectacle began to proliferate with a waterfront known as the quai, or the quai, the seafront in French, assuming its role as the European face of the city. In 1894, the first purpose-built theatre was introduced to Smyrna, which had hitherto made do with makeshift and short-lived venues. The new auditorium was a sporting club theatre built to plunge by Polikaros Vitalis on the site of the demolished Olympia Theatre. This was followed in 1911 by the Smyrna Theatre, built to design by Ignatios Zoufkadis, and opened in 1911. Both new venues were hailed with description of the local press of the period. This is not the Smyrna Theatre, it's a detail of the Sporting Club Theatre. The new Sporting Club Theatre was described in the Nea Smyrna newspaper of 1894 as elegant and most luxurious, and with attractive and extremely comfortable seats, upholstered in dark red material with gold braid. I continue the quotation. The new theatre has a large rectangular auditorium with a richly decorated ceiling and a large and beautiful chandelier. The auditorium can accommodate 600 persons with lavish and comfortable seats. Before one reaches the auditorium, on each side of the entrance there were two rooms, one serving as a canteen and the other as cloakroom. The actual stage is also fairly spacious and decorated with all sorts of gilding, while the beautifully painted sets were made by neighbors. A balcony and foyer were subsequently added to the building, in front of what we are seeing now. The Smyrna Theatre was designed to meet the need of a new winter theatre, since the Sporting Club Theatre, with only a limited number of seats, was obliged to keep its ticket prices high and therefore was accessible only to the more affluent classes, whose commitments do not always allow them to support all the performances. We see the theatre on the seafront. The new theatre has something to offer all tastes and incomes. It has superb lighting and ventilations, stands with comfortable seats, a balcony for the patricians and a gallery for the plebeians, a broad stage with an opulent curtain, marvelous scenery and a variety of devices imported from Vienna, which can reproduce the sound of rain, wind and thunder, as well as a special machine producing multicolored lighting for productions of a phantasmagoric nature. The auditorium is lavishly decorated with the most artistic gilded ornamentation, the work of the Greek sculptor Renieris. There was also a smoking room and various other apartments, all furnished to the most exquisite of taste from Mr. Xanopoulos' stores in the French Quarter. According to Solomonides, the theatre was built to the plans for the Châtelet in Paris. In fact, the only similarity... Sorry? In fact, the only similarity one might detect between the two theatres is the internal layout of the boxes, the common features of the theatres of the second half of the 19th century. Elsewhere, in the superb facade of the Theatre Patriadis, we see again a highly proficient handling of the stylistic options of eclecticism. The Smyrna Theatre opened the doors with a performance by the Kotopouli Lepenotis Company in April 1911. The cinema venues were not so impressive. The only one is this small cinema parterre designed by a Greek architect. next to the theater we've just seen. And let's close our presentation with the residential architecture. The private houses of Smyrna represent a particularly appealing aspect of the city's architecture and indeed not pass unnoticed by the architectural journals of the period. On 9 September 1901, the French journal La Construction Moderne published an article by Apostolitis, a local architect, on the typical Smyrna house. The author notes that this particular type of urban house was much influenced in its design by the very narrow building plots on which homes were constructed in the European parts of the city, especially in Punta, where building land was divided up into smaller units than elsewhere. Most of the housing consisted of rows of two-story buildings, the main characteristics of each individual house being the recessed entrance and the closed balcony in the upper floor. There thus emerged the European urban house of modern Smyrna, which began to be built along the quays, the seafront, as soon as the waterfront project was complete, and then advanced towards the interior of the city, the parallel second key cordon, and then the small streets in the northern and eastern parts of the town, where the old city of Smyrna was at that time expanding and the new city being built. I quote, it was a two-story, one-family house and had the first floor, really a ground floor, raised at the height of just 3 or 4 steps from street level, floor, basement and mezzanine, entresoli. The basement had no special name, but in the dialect of Smyrna, the mezzanine was commonly referred to as the entresol, or in a purer form of Greek, entresoli, from the French word entresol. At the top of the house was the doma or roof terrace. The facade of the house was enhanced by a closed wooden balcony, such as characteristic feature of Smyrna domestic architecture, providing extra space and healthy fresh air. On the first floor, reached by the steep steps of the recessed entrance, was the hall leading to the drawing and dining rooms, while in a wing at the back of the house were the auxiliary areas and rooms for everyday use, as well as the kitchen, commodità, the water closet, and laundry room. The mezzanine floor comprised an ironing room, servants' room and bathroom, while the bedrooms were located on the second floor. A closed balcony in front of the master bedroom provided a small but valuable area for the family to gather in the late afternoon and early evening. On the waterfront, variations of the basic type house could be found, adapted to suit larger or combined building plots. In these cases, there was the space to create a symmetrical facade, but without altering its main features, the recessed entrance and the open or closed balcony on the upper floor. It would have a mirror arrangement of the same type of house. In these cases, there was the space to create on rare occasions, as we see to the left, there was an attic floor where a triangular or more rarely a curved pediment might be introduced. In terms of stylistic choices, in contrast to the practice in commercial architecture, we see a desire to echo the Greek character of the various public buildings of the community, using the codified vocabulary of neoclassicism, pediments, etc. In fact, neoclassicism was the first choice of both architects and owners, although it was not without the well-known deviations in the direction of other more artificial forms. By a comparative study of the cadastral map of 1889 and the photographs in the Rubelan archive, it is possible to identify a number of the Greek-owned houses of the seafront. Along the Smyrna waterfront, only very few isolated examples of the old urban houses have survived. They are located in the part of the waterfront which spared by the fire, but could not escape the redevelopment of the 60s, when many old properties were surrendered to developers in exchange for part of a new building, which replaced them. In Punta, now known as Sanjak, however, the only district which has remained largely unchanged, a fair number of the characteristic town of houses have survived intact. In the absence of cadastral resorts, however, it is impossible to identify the individual owners of these architecturally interesting buildings. In the upper city, where the school and church of Agios Ioannis have survived, residential buildings have been identified, some isolated, some still in rows, which reproduce the same typology, at least in the organization of the facades. God plans do not cover this district, so here too it is almost impossible to identify the owners of individual houses. We face the same difficulties in the suburbs of Smyrna, where there were significant Greek communities before 92, at Siliaga, Cortelion, Gostanik, Karatina, Göztepe, Asanseur, Karatas, Kopargeli. There is one special case, the two-number resorts of the outskirts of Smyrna, Puja and Kornova, where there were significant concentrations of Greek-owned properties, mainly villas and smaller houses. This is Puja. But of all the suburban housing in this region, the literature available only allows to identify, except of these row houses we see now, the villas of Baltaji and Puja, Xenopoulos and Bornova, Omer and Cordelio, and Fotiadis and Sergipio. But let's see the variation of the type house of Smyrna in the surrounding area. Here we are in Otla, with some very few inscriptions about the ownership, and the famous villas of Omer and Cordelio, Xenopoulos and Fotiadis, respectively in Bornova and Sergipio, and the Villa Baltaji in Puja. There is a very interesting description of this type of villa for Saitano Palace in Karantina. I quote by Didos Sotiriou. Saitano had a house like a palace in Karantina. No passage Serapio was bigger, all in marble, surrounded by gardens of palm trees, bougainvilleas, roses, lemon trees, and flower beds full of flowers. It had a tennis court, a stable for the horses, an artificial lake, and a whole forest of trees in whose shade the sons of the master and their wives would lounge and drink. The first floor had sitting rooms, studies, a whole room lined with bookcases, dining rooms with Persian rugs and furniture from Venice. The walls were paneled and worn out and hung with tapestries, ancestral portraits looked down for golden frames. End of quotation. The architecture of Smyrna, in particular the type of the urban house, was to be adopted by the other major centers of the Greek world along the Asian Minor coast, as well as the islands of the Eastern Aegean, Chios, Mytilene, and Samos. Some historians call it the Chios-type house, and I wonder if it has first appeared in Chios after the earthquake of 1881 and then transferred to Smyrna by builders and craftsmen active in both cities, or it was first created to Smyrna and transferred to the islands afterwards. That's a question to all of us. Sanjak, Chios, and Sanjak, no, sorry, it's not Sanjak. I think it's Karatas and Mytilene. Again, Mytilene and Karatas. Urla and Chios, Urla and Molivos, Mytilene, Molivos. So it's a common vocabulary, both in type and in form of these buildings. So, as I said, the same architectural features would be used to stress the neoclassical heritage of Greek houses in Urla, Chesme, Fokia, and to the north, Ibalic, Mosphoresian Pergamon. At the same time, and with this I will close, well-known Smyrna architects were invited to design some of the most impressive houses in the upper middle class in the island of Mytilene. In the context of these architectural exchanges, Xenophon Latris would be commissioned to build a villa for Gianellis and Vafiadis to design the homes of Alanzas, Hadji Christophas, Bournazos, and Hadji Christophas' son. So let's see what they have done in Mytilene. Classical, eclectic, everything. And the personal taste for these corner towers of Vafiadis in a villa in Mytilene, but the same his bank in Smyrna. Like this. Modern day Smyrna is a city of how many millions? 4 millions now? 4, okay. So I guess 4 million inhabitants. It presents a fragmented picture to the visitor. Moving from the traditional commercial center to the upper city, and from there to Alsancak, embarking on a journey through time and space, one discovers within the discontinuity of the urban space the absence of the last nucleus of the city. There is a vacuum at the head of the city, redolent of departure, absence and loss. It is only the waterfront, despite the new extension of the city into the sea, and the creation of a new quay, which unifies and recreates through the element of water the identity of the old cosmopolitan Smyrna, projected that image like a palimpsest, just discernible beneath the modern city, forever indelible. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this wonderful presentation, Vasilis, and probably we have questions from the audience if we have time. Sorusu olan.
Very quickly, well, just one question. Are there any photos of interiors in your collection?
That's the big problem. We don't have any interiors. Because even the pictures we have from family archives, there were pictures in the photo studio. So it's not in their own houses. They went to the photograph, they were posing, it's a picture of in front of a decor. So we don't have pictures of the interior. That's my big problem. So if you found some pictures from the interior, welcome.
Well, I have two more. Do you also have in your collection information about the northern part, Cordayor, Garciaca? Do you have, you mentioned one only. Do you have more?
Of course, more, but I wait for the young generation to go on this research. cannot go on. For me, it's enough to make what was existing in the beginning of the 20th century and how it has been developed. Out the historical nucleus, it's a big story. You cannot find any element. If the cadastre is published or studied by somebody else, we could have this information. But I know that all these theses they are prepared in the universities here. They are concentrated on the Levantine heritage of Nova, Puja, and the center, not the outskirts. Katsiaka is Cordelio. We know just the club of Petropoukinos, which is still a club, an officers' club or something. No, teachers' club, I think. And nothing else. I've been once with Arif in Cordelio 30 years ago, and we found nothing. Difficult questions. I mean, without answers.
Well, maybe my third one also is similar. You showed a lot of interesting buildings.
A
lot of interesting buildings. Do we know their location today, or maybe are you planning to include a map in your book pointing to the location of at least some of them?
Yes, but what it is known from the gold plans, of course, we have. I mean, the communal buildings, the schools, the churches, and the venues, the larger venues are marked. The other is an investigation through a comparative analysis between the Rubelan archive, the Trinidad I had found some years ago, and the cadastre of the new seafront designed by the Dissot Frère, which is in good analysis, so we can make the identification of the houses. So for the houses on the seafront, that's why I have discovered the Greek ownerships, how I could discover.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I guess everyone is waiting for the coffee break. That's observable. So thank you very much for being here with us, and hopefully it's only a start. So we wish you to be here more and more after 24 years, if I'm not wrong. Maybe it's time.
I come to present the new book.
Okay.
Next year.
We will be really happy. A very small thing to remember.
I have a present. Just a moment. So it's a diploma. In the left half is çok teşekkür ederim.
Sohbete dışarı devam ederiz isterseniz.
Thank you.